Today I'm going to talk about iconic comics and offer a series of random thoughts on influential comic book images. The criteria at work here in these highly subjective and very sporadic pieces, and feel that these are images which have made a massive impact on the way that certainly I've looked at comics and many others have. These are also artworks which define what makes the medium so very potent and so enduring. One might say these are single panels and sometimes splash pages that have transcended the art form of the comic book itself and can be said to have encapsulated a particular moment in time, be it evolutionary or simply as an embodiment of a contemporary concept. A great comic book panel is often the evidence of a sense of agency. It's where word and image come together to encapsulate a narrative's agenda, a unique idea or a truth. The panel can be a singular image, a focal point which has moved, shocked or surprised the reader through its virtuosity and through its positioning within a larger story. The panel can be a standout moment, characterised through its sheer audacity and sense of style. Simply put, these are images that get behind the eyes. Think of them as definitive moments within definitive narratives. There are panels, arguably, which have been transformed from being merely accomplished pieces of art that serve a linear story into artistic statements which have shifted into the register of the iconic. They have secured a life away from the page and have moved into a more historical register. These will also be my personal choices, so sorry there's no accounting for taste. This is from The Final Chapter, Spider-Man number 33, Marvel Comics, February 1966, which was written by Stan Lee and drawn and inked and also co-written by Steve Ditko and coloured by Stan Goldberg. Steve Ditko, the co-creator of Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, and arguably along with Jack Kirby, one of the pop art architects of the 1960s, died on June 29th, 2018 at the age of 90. To many men of a certain age, he was the illustrator who brought to life one of the revolutionary superhero soap operas of all time, and provided a wiry, anxious and altogether more agile counterpoint to the blocks of power and muscle essayed by his opposite number at Marvel, Jack Kirby. And whilst Kirby soared further and further into cosmic territory as the 1960s progressed with the Fantastic Four, Thor, etc., Ditko was never really at home with the machinery or the mechanics. He was heavily influenced by the Batman artist Jerry Robinson and comic pro Mort Meskin. Ditko's natural register was tension, fear and the mysterious, anxiety, as he worked more effectively within more internalised shadowy stories about retribution and paranoia, which are undoubtedly his forte. Though they never really met more than a few times, history now seems to have conjoined Kirby and Ditko as a pair of writer-artists. For both have been responsible for supplying concepts that today are being mercilessly exploited by major Hollywood studios, and which have informed the popular visual grammar of not just the 1960s, but also of the first 2 decades of the 21st century. Many essays, compilations, reprints, biographies, interviews, blogs and opinions have been posted about Ditko. And much has been written about his reclusiveness and abject refusal to engage with the publicity machine. So inevitably a kind of mystique has grown up around the man, and his reasoning for walking away and rejecting one of the era's defining cultural stories, that of the Marvel publishing phenomenon. As Kirby has been cast as the stoic workhorse, a creative genius exploited by the ruthless, less talented others, Ditko's cultural image has become that of the perennial loner, paranoid and defensive, someone who's perhaps a little too over-principled to survive in the cutthroat mass entertainment industries. The truth about what Ditko's nature is more likely much more prosaic, and I'll let others speculate on that. There are plenty of superb books out there on Ditko that not only collate much of his early work but give insight into his travels from horror to science fiction and suspense through the 1950s up until the costume vigilante figures of the 1960s and beyond. For me, I just wanted to highlight a key image most associated with the man. To me, one of the most emblematic images associated with Ditko is not necessarily one of his most accomplished drawings, but it ably demonstrates the understanding of the comic form and his grasp of the importance of iconography over simple index or representation. By this point in the classic early 1960s Lee Ditko run of Spider-Man, the strip had evolved into two parallel narratives running concurrently and serving two creative agendas. As far as editor and writer Stan Lee was concerned, he was supplying dialogue and story guidance for a teenage superhero soap opera that had revolutionised the genre since its first appearance in Amazing Fantasy number 15 back in 1962, adding words to an increasingly distant Steve Ditko's pictures. Unbeknownst to him, and indeed most of the strip's readers at the time, Ditko was becoming increasingly disenchanted with Lee's tendencies to claim credit for much of the work that he felt he had initiated, and to publicly reduce the artist's role in that remarkable explosion of creativity that took place at Marvel during this time. For some time, Ditko had privately been using the Peter Parker character as a way of testing out some of his philosophical ideas around objectivism, the right-wing thinker Ayn Rand's framework of thought that dismissed a collective society in favour of personal individual achievements and a sense of a rigid, if somewhat simplistic, moral clarity.
He takes a card and shades one half of it in dark, so he can demonstrate to you just what he means. He says there's black and there is white, and there is wrong and there is right, and there is nothing in between. That's what Mr. A said.
In the story dramatically titled by Lee, The Final Chapter, the issue begins with Peter Parker as Spider-Man, evidently trapped between a mass of steel bulkheads and machinery by the Master Planner, who is actually a scheming Dr. Octopus. As Parker struggles, the room fills with water, and he reflects on the life he's leaving behind and the problems that he has had to surmount. Parker becomes faced with not only his imminent demise, but also with the limits of his own strength and abilities, framed by an internal dialogue where he reminds himself that the power he's been granted only has meaning and value if he is worthy of using it for the right aims. In true Randian fashion, he seizes his own inner strength and takes control of the situation by slowly lifting the machinery above him. Stan Lee's words complementing the actions, in many ways providing a somewhat superfluous addition to Ditko's self-explanatory preceding panel sequence. The panel's impact is less about the actual art itself, and it more resides on the lead-in, where Parker is reminded of his choice and his responsibilities. This exemplifies Ditko's innate understanding of the graphic form and his ease with sequence and consequence. His power relates to the very heart of superheroism itself. Its message perhaps highlights the contradictions and problems that exist within the doctrines of self-determination and actualization taking precedence over a larger society. That those who are brilliant perhaps shouldn't be restrained by those who are less so. As an expression of the will and self-reliance, it is difficult to deny that Ditko encapsulates the heart of the character at that point, and indeed summates what the superhero is actually all about. It's a much more personal internal climax than anyone like Kirby would have attempted, and maybe lacks the King's dynamism and power, but tells us much about the way Ditko was thinking about the character, and that at that point it was clear he was about to sign off forever. Ditko's heroes were becoming less nuanced and more certain of themselves, something that rubbed against the fundamentals of Lee's more grounded universe and his original intent. Whether Ditko explicitly set this out as a definitive Randian statement is hazy, as the great man has often chosen to sidestep interviews about this period, but the symbolic reading appears inescapable here, as an everyman defined not by chance or by good fortune but by his own agency, and the expression of a force of will ties in pretty handily with many of the themes Ditko would go on to explore in more openly philosophical books such as Mr. A and the more user-friendly The Question. Ditko left and Spider-Man has continued to be one of the company's flagship titles, although turned into something probably more in line with Lee's original intent. The successor to Ditko, John Romita Sr., may well have suited Lee's more personality and romance-based agendas. In truth, it was Romita who ensured the strip's success into the 1960s and beyond. Nothing quite matches the spiky, nervy, intense and clearly unique work of Ditko, whose artistic choices and themes seem perfectly in tune with the notion of a perennial outsider seeking to make sense of a confusing world of nuances and grey shades.